Turn this on. Hi, everyone. My name is Jack Darrell. Steve was my uncle. And, you know, I want to say right off the bat, growing up, I don't think I really got Steve. You know, and I think in my defense, probably everyone here can recognize, you know, he was not the easiest person to get. And, you know, I think, like, he's a good example, is I think he is probably the only person I know that I can, like, specifically remember the first time I got him to laugh or smile. And, you know, and maybe this speaks more to my dismal prospects as a comedian, but I feel like I can probably remember every time. And, you know, the thing is that none of them were notable. None of them were, you know, compelling enough anecdotes to tell here. But they mattered to me, you know, because with Steve, I think this was always true of my uncle, I damn well earned that smile. You know, I think, yeah, I'm up here to do the greeting. And it's sort of a weird part of the funeral ritual, right? Like, I understand why you do a greeting here. But, you know, we've all been thrust into this, you know, against our will, without our input, for a man who's probably unlike anyone any of us have ever known. How do you welcome any of us into this moment? You know, a writer that I really like wrote something a long time ago that I've been thinking about a lot recently. They said that losing someone like Steve is like walking up the stairs to your bedroom in the dark and thinking there's one more step than there is. You know, that moment, that feeling where your foot falls in this sort of jolting and disorienting moment where you have to kind of rethink or try to readjust to the way you thought about things. I think in recent weeks, we've all been missing a lot of steps. But I think as I'm standing here now on this stage, looking out at all of you, I see that there's a different side, another side of this moment. We all, every one of us, woke up this morning, put on a collar or a dress, and packed into this gymnasium for one man. Each of us here was tempered by his brusqueness, rewarded by his joy, held in his wholeness, because I think that's what it was. He didn't pull punches, he didn't play nice, and because of that, he was able to be there for you in your wholeness, in his wholeness. He was able to be there for you at home, on the field, whatever was happening in his life. And so with that in mind, I want to say welcome to the rest of our lives as the lucky few, the people blessed to have known Steve Dubin. And I want to finish with a prayer. A lot of you, most people in this room probably recognize these words from a lot of different contexts. But I want you to hear them now in the context of Steve and the way he sought to live his life. Lord, or whatever you believe in, make us channels of your peace. Where there's hatred, we can bring love. Where there's wrong, we can bring right. Where there's discord, we can bring harmony. Where there's error, we can bring forgiveness. Where there's despair, we can bring hope. Where there's shadows, we can bring light. Sadness, we can bring joy. Let us try to comfort rather than be comforted. Try to understand before being understood. Try to love rather than be loved. It's by self-forgetting that one finds. It's by forgiving that we are forgiven. It's by dying that we awaken to eternal life.
Hard to follow that. Wow. Can we stand for the reciting of Psalm 23? Thank you. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. You can join in too, by the way. He leads me down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You take your seat if you want. George, Peter, Marty, thank you very much for being inclusive and accepting to allow 3 Crusaders up on the stage today to be involved in such a beautiful tribute to such an exceptional man. Thank you guys very much. I love you guys. Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on snow. I'm the sunlight on ripened grain. I'm the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I'm the swift uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I'm not there. I did not die.
Good morning. Georgiana, Peter, Marty, we're so incredibly sorry for the loss of Steve. He's irreplaceable in every way. Steve was a devoted husband and father. He adored you and he admired you, Georgiana. And he was so incredibly proud of you, Peter and Marty, both of the young men that you are and the young men that you're becoming. Steve was a treasured teacher and coach, mentor, colleague, and friend. And before he was all of those things, he was a Laker. Cut from the finest bolt of maroon and white cloth, Steve loved our school, and he exemplified what it meant to live out our motto, Esse quam modere, to be rather than to seem. Before his more than 40 years as a colleague and great influence on our community, he was one of our boys. He was a Laker. I'm honored to share a reflection from Dyson Earhart, our longtime associate headmaster emeritus, who knew Steve before anyone else and is in so many ways responsible for his time here. I met Steve's father first. He was insistent that Steve was a great athlete and I should consider him for admission. I remember thinking, he can't be all that good. I've met so many sons whose parents have told me they're great athletes. But Steve's dad was right. Steve really was everything and more than what his father said. Steve displayed a level of athleticism rarely seen in one so young, and his athletic career here on Lake Avenue and down the road at Hopkins confirmed his father's predictions. I hired Stevie 41 years ago to be the school's new director of alumni relations. After years of leading the alumni program in 2005, he became the director of facilities. It was an easy transition for Steve because to him, Boys Latin was his home, and his work as facilities director showed he maintained the school just as he did his home, making him the perfect man for the job. Through many of those years, he coached varsity lacrosse as a defensive coordinator and taught an upper school history class or two in addition to his full-time responsibilities. Steve wasn't a man who punched a clock. He understood his work at Boys Latin was much more than some 8-hour gig. He wanted to give to each boy with whom he came in contact those same life lessons Steve learned as a student here on Lake Avenue. And if the overwhelming letters and notes from alumni that they've sent after learning of Steve's passing are any indication, Steve was a master teacher both in the classroom and on the field. Steve lived our motto, Esse quam modere, to be rather than to seem, every day and in all of his actions. I've always said lucky is the man who can count on 5 true friends. Steve was such a friend to me, and I shall miss him greatly. But I hold on to this. Steve loved lacrosse, Boys Latin School, mentoring the boys and young men he taught and coached, and being a part of something bigger than himself. This school on Lake Avenue, where he helped mold boys into men. But most of all, Steve loved George, his wife, and their 2 sons, Peter and Marty. I hope the 3 of you understand that you don't carry Dubs alone. The hundreds of men who went through the halls and across the fields under his tutelage carry him and carry you as well. Steve lived our motto to be rather than to seem every day in all his actions. I love you, Stevie. Dyson. There wasn't anything Steve would ask someone else to do that he wouldn't do or want to do himself. Steve Dubin was Boys Latin's man for all seasons. Steve of the springtime prowled the lacrosse sidelines with his signature coat and hat, neck gaiter, and a scowl that belied the joy and the great satisfaction that he derived from coaching generations of boys and men, so many of you who are here today. But that same scowl, it appeared as he battled Mother Nature. Friends, there are lots of reasons that Steve was known as Rainy Day. When cold Maryland rain left gutters overflowing, out came Steve, ladder in tow, scaling the alumni house. During one monsoon many years ago, I swear I saw Steve strap himself to the bridge like Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump, screaming at the Almighty, "Is this the best you've got?" Spring brings summer, and out would come summertime Steve, a mellower, relaxed Steve, right? Not so much. Sure, he had a summer crew who would help him, students, recent graduates, even his own sons over time. But not summertime Steve. If Zeus once gave Sisyphus a boulder to constantly roll up the hill, well, Otis Reed gave Steve an enormous wheel, a water wheel, that he toted all over campus to saturate even the slightest of brown spots. The installation of the turf fields years later should have alleviated Steve's burden, right? Not a chance. The middle school field, the baseball field, even the grass area behind the stadium pavilion all received extra attention from Steve. As summer turned to fall, Steve's pace quickened. You know how he could pace all around you, yet actually never go anywhere? When we were finishing the construction of the student commons, I remember Steve pacing furiously on the path from the flagpole in front of the alumni house to the crosswalk, no more than 10 feet away. I'm sure if we checked his phone in that 10-minute conversation, he would have walked more than 10,000 steps. It's also right there that Steve performed his annual battle with the enormous larch tree, which, to Steve, was an enormous nuisance. In the fall, its branches glow this resplendent golden color, and then they drop their needles all at once. Every fall, Steve would meticulously rake to restore the green grass on the pavement. I'm pretty sure that he carried a pair of tweezers in his tool belt to remove the last 200 or 300 of those needles. As those needles were removed and the cold winds blew from the north, Steve, our lion of the winter, would emerge. In his wake, followed by a trail of ice melt, blue ice melt, orange ice melt, yellow ice melt. The color didn't matter as long as it could be ordered by the metric ton. There was a greater hazard in the winter from tripping over the leftover ice melt than there actually was of ever slipping on ice here on campus. Discussing potential school closings with Steve was like preparing to negotiate a peace treaty. The opening salvo, the first call, would come the night before from him. Well, this thing could really overperform. I think we're going to be closed for 2 or 3 days. Then, at the turn of 4 o'clock in the morning, my phone would ring. Over the next 20 or 25 minutes, he'd tell me how his neighborhood was terrible, how every other neighborhood was a mess. Then he'd tell me that Charles Street was okay in spots, but you'd never want to drive a bus down Charles Street. And then when he was turning onto Lake Avenue, amazingly, there was only a single lane that could pass by, and it was right in the middle of Lake Avenue. And then he'd exclaim, almost always, I swear to God, I just saw a city plow turn onto Lake Avenue, pull up its blade in front of our school so that it actually didn't move any of the snow, turn into our parking lot, turn around, and then go back down Roland Avenue. He'd pull into campus and gruffly wish me a nice nap before he called me again, fire the snowblower up, and go to work. And we typically open just 2 hours late. Steve was meticulous and he was careful. He was thorough, he was exacting, and he was determined. And he had an extraordinary sense of humor. Most every conversation with me ended with the words, well, don't screw it up, or some variation of that theme. In truth, those were his last words to me. In the spring of 2020, Steve literally scoured and secured every inch of our campus as we began to contend with the COVID pandemic. There was a stretch where only Steve, Bill Ryan, Wayne Cornish, and I would be on campus intermittently, just the 4 of us. And on one of those quiet May afternoons, Steve looked at Bill and me in the lobby of the upper school, looked around, took a deep breath, and said with great satisfaction, you know what? There's no one around. We're going to look back, and we're going to miss this time. God, I miss him. I hear his voice, I hear his shuffle and jangle of the keys in the hallway, his rustling and rooting anywhere and everywhere for peanut M&Ms. Steve was our man for all seasons. He was undaunted in the face of the greatest challenges, most especially in his heroic battle with cancer. Steve led by example, and he was unafraid to do whatever it took to serve others and the mission of our school. I can't help but think of the coming and going of each season and imagine Steve in all of his different forms. I'm so grateful for Steve and our school's life, and I'm so grateful for our friendship. I'm so glad that Dyson listened to his father. Until we see you again, Steve, you know we're going to do our best not to screw it up.
Good morning. I would like to thank Headmaster Chris Post, Coach Bob Shriver, David Lipinski, and John Ciccarone for including Johns Hopkins lacrosse in Steve Dubin's life celebration. I would also like to share our deepest condolences to Steve's wife, Georgiana, and sons Marty and Peter on their loss. It is a privilege to have the opportunity to share the collective thoughts of Dubin's teammates and coaches during his time as a member of the Blue Jay lacrosse program. In 1982, I was hired by Johns Hopkins to come on board as an assistant lacrosse coach. Towards the end of the fall semester, and just prior to the holiday season, future team captain Willie Odenthal and former Laker defenseman Guy Matrosini came to me and confided to me that Steve was unhappy and thinking of leaving the team. I was told that Steve could be found at the Mount Washington Tavern that evening. Having been to the tavern on several occasions myself, I decided to pay Steve a little visit, walking through the tavern doors, much to his surprise. We had a really good talk and agreed that there was no quit in Steve Dubin, that he was both an integral part of the program and a treasured teammate. Steve decided to stay on board with the team and had a productive junior season. No quit. Dubs quietly displayed the same determination and resilience over these past 3.5 years. The following year, Dubs really came into his own. He was the lone senior defensive player and a starter on the team, anchoring an extremely talented Jays defense. Junior Larry Quinn was our goalkeeper, and as all good goalies, was the general of the defense. Dubs served as his sergeant at arms, taking control of matters outside of the crease. He was the Jays' enforcer and was extremely effective in that role. Steve didn't take anything from anybody. On the field, Dubs was all business. He led by example and demanded the same from his teammates. He was a perfectionist, a detail guy, but at the same time, he always tried to keep things light and simple. Dubs was a glue guy who was well respected by his teammates and coaches. Dubs had a little Jekyll and Hyde in him. Off the field, he was somewhat of a character. Steve could bust chops with the best of them. More importantly, he could take it better than just about anyone else. Steve did not take himself too seriously, which is a wonderful trait. He always downplayed his abilities and was slow to take credit. One of our backup goalies, John Mad Dog Madden, a teammate, commented that Steve was one of the most hilariously self-deprecating people he'd ever met. Dubs was always there for his teammates. In a conversation with Larry Quinn, he recalled how Dubs took this somewhat wet behind the ears freshman from Levittown, Long Island, under his wing. So at spring break, and Dubs grabs Larry to go see the Boys Latin campus and attend a lacrosse game. Before going to the game, they stop by Eddie's, and Dubs orders up 2 soft-shell crab sandwiches to go. Larry had no idea what a soft-shell crab sandwich was. At the checkout counter, Dubs tells the cashier to go ahead and put it on the family account. Larry had never heard of such a thing and was very impressed. From there, before going to the game, the two went to Dubs' home and enjoyed their sandwiches with a gin and tonic. This was certainly a momentous occasion for Larry, as it was the first ever soft-shell crab sandwich he had seen, let alone eaten, and the last time he would ever drink a G&T. The Jays' offensive coach at that time, and for many years, was a man named Fred Smith. Freddie was, in my and many others' opinion, one of the finest coaches and human beings ever to pick up a lacrosse stick. According to Quinn Kesnick, Dubs was the embodiment of Fred Smith. Same mannerisms, same philosophy, same terminology, same effectiveness, same passion for the game and the players that he coached. For me, watching Steve from the stands was like seeing the next generation Fred Smith. And that, my friends, is the highest of compliments. In the annals of Hopkins lacrosse, Steve Dubin will go down as an unassuming leader and unsung hero of the 1984 National Championship team. He will always be a Blue Jay. In life, Coach Steve Dubin will be remembered as having a lifelong commitment to teaching young men not only the game of lacrosse, but more importantly, the many life lessons that are learned on the field. Steve Dubin was and will forever be a Boys Latin Laker. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brian Farrell. I live at 635 Chestnut Avenue. My mom's name is Lee. My dad's name is Mike. I have a little sister named Annie, and I have a pet named Taylor. If you were to come to a practice in the spring of 2006, you would have heard this from all the Boys Latin defenders as we sat at the gazebo in the top parking lot for our weekly roll call. On the top turf, Dubs would be standing in the middle of the field with his arm out, just like this, his thumb out like this, and if you were loud enough for him to hear your full name, your address, parents' name, siblings' names, and if you had a pet, you'd get the thumbs up. If not, it was a quick thumbs down, louder, next. Coach Dubs kept it very simple for us. In order to communicate properly, you had to be loud and clear. If he asked you a question, you had three options. Yes, no, I don't understand. I heard this so many times. Farrell, it's not hard. Yes, no, I don't understand. And I was always the smart ass that said, I don't understand. We had two defenses, just two, 7 and blue. If he was wearing the blue snow cap that you see right here, we were in blue. If the snow cap was down, we were in 7. Pretty simple stuff. He had a unique way of coaching, and he always did it his way. And it worked. It worked for so many of us who were so lucky to have played for him. He was a master at teaching toughness, both physically and mentally. Physically, again, very simple. Discipline through consequence. The most classic example of this, the one-handed ground ball. If you were caught picking up a ground ball with one hand, that was a 3-stop. You'll hear that a lot today. A 3-stop, for those of you who don't know, is a punishment run, where a player needs to go on the end line, run to the close restraining line and back, then the midfield line and back, and then the far restraining line and back. He thought it was the perfect balance between not being too tough, a 4-stop, and not being too easy, a 2-stop, a 3-stop. And he was a hawk about it. You'd be standing around practice, just joking with your buddies, and casually pick up one ground ball with one hand. You heard your name, you saw those 3 fingers in the air, and you knew exactly where you were headed, the end line for your 3-stop. And of course, he was famous for planning our annual Hell Day tradition down in Florida. All the players would have to go through rotational stations with each coach giving us their best conditioning drill first for that first hour. We tried to stay tough. We tried to make it through, but we knew the real pain was coming at the end. We'd turn around from our final water break. Coach Dubes would be standing at the midfield line, smile, twirling his whistle around with plenty of beautiful space to operate with. All righty, men. D here, middies here, pretty boys over here. That's what he called the attackman. We're going to start off with the ladder. The ladder, for those of you who don't know, is a one-stop followed by a two-stop to a three-stop to a four-stop. That's going up the ladder. Then you had to do another four-stop followed by a three-stop to a two-stop and finishing with a one-stop. All in full sweats, by the way, all after an hour of conditioning in the Florida sun. It was brutal, but it became a tradition we grew to love. And funny enough, now it's something that our boys actually look forward to every year. But where Dubes was truly brilliant was on the mental side of the game. He rarely talked about X's and O's, and I found out later that Coach never watched film. His game plan was always about us. How could we get into the other team's head, and how could we control the tempo through our own mindset? My sophomore year, I was assigned to guard a hot-headed attackman from another school, and Coach knew everything about this kid. He had an idea that he thought would get inside his head, and he gave me his psychological game plan. He told me every time the ball was on our offensive end and we were standing at the midfield line, I needed to lightly put my stick on his glove like this. Just lightly, right on his glove. So that's what I did. First possession down, on the glove. He got annoyed, swatted it away. I thought that I had done my job. Coach was proud of me, and I didn't have to do it again. But then I heard it. Farrell. I could feel that gesture as I put my stick back on his glove. And I kept doing it for 4 quarters, putting my stick on the glove, getting it knocked away, looking over at Coach like, really, man? Like, can I stop? But you could tell it was getting to the hot-headed attackman. He was losing his mind. Finally, late in the 4th quarter, that attackman scored a goal to put them up 1 goal for the game. After he scored, he got in my face, and he goes, "That's what you get for all that BS putting your stick on my glove the entire game." Sure enough, the ref was right there. He saw it. Whoop! 1 minute, non-releasable penalty for unsportsmanlike conduct. We went on to score a goal on that man-up possession and then eventually won the game by a goal. Coach would never take credit for a win, but that was all Dubes. That was his genius. He knew people. He knew how to reach us, how to challenge us, and how to make us tougher. Not just as players, but as men. When I was a player, I never understood this. It wasn't until I became a coach that I could really reflect on the impact that he made on me and so many of the players he coached. What I admired about him most was his humility. For all his success and wisdom, he never wanted the spotlight. He just wanted to help his players figure out this game called life in his own quirky and weird ways. And that's what made him so special. Coach will forever and always be our lacrosse program's unsung hero. And even after all the wins and amazing season, Coach's greatest success was being a dad to you two, Peter and Marty. I got to work alongside of him professionally, and I got to see another side of him, the dad side. He loved telling stories about you guys, and he loved when you guys worked facilities with him over the summer. He was so proud of you both and the men that you've become. You know, as coaches, we caught up in the victories, the game plans, and championships. But what Dubes taught us is that chemistry, connection, and just being a good person is truly what matters. You're about to hear from some more coaches who worked alongside him, and they've got stories, plenty of stories, that reminded us that while we players thought we were having all the fun, the real laughter was happening on the sidelines. Thank you, Coach. Thanks for being you, and thank you for transforming the lives of so many young men. We'll miss you.
Morning, everybody. Last time I addressed the Eagle Hearts, I didn't need these, but it's been a while. So when Lipper called me and said, hey, you know, would you mind giving some remarks for Dubes, I was certainly honored and happy to do so. I put at the title for my remarks here, Tribute to Dubes from his coaching buddy. And honestly, like that's what our relationship was. You know, usually around the Tuesday after President's Day when we'd start lacrosse practice till typically during the years I was here would pretty much go to the last game of the season in May. You know, we were coaching buddies. And I can remember we would usually always start in the coach's room. He'd have that outfit on, and he'd put his arms out, and we would just give each other a big hug, and it was like, all right, buckle up, we're going for another season together. And you know, and Dubes and I, you know, coached for the better part of almost 20 years here at Boys Latin. So when I was thinking about, like, how am I possibly going to, you know, take all these Dubes stories and consolidate them, I realized, well, half of them I could never tell here, so I can pare the list down immediately. And then, you know, I just started having these data dump of Dubes thoughts, and there's so many. So I kind of thought, all right, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Dubes perspective, which was different than anyone else's perspective. I'll talk a little bit about the Dubes experience, and I know Coach Farrell alluded to how much fun we had, and I'll go into that a little bit. And then the Dubes legacy. Like I said, you know, our relationship really grew as we became coaches together. I mean, I started school here in 7th grade. My family moved here from Canada. My dad was coaching the Baltimore Skipjacks, and I was like as new to, you know, United States and Maryland as possible. We were living at Barton Mitchell's house, who was a, you know, Laker legend, and Barton's 3 boys went to BL, and his wife's boys went to McDonough, and we were Catholic, so I know my parents wanted me to look at Loyola. But the minute I got to BL, I knew I was hooked, because I was looking for, you know, a place where I could play sports, meet some lifelong buddies, and most importantly, I was looking for male role models, you know, coaches, guys that were like my dad. And man, did I ever find it here, and I, you know, see a lot of those guys here today. But, you know, as far as my relationship with Dubes, you know, I didn't really know who he was as a student. He worked in the development office, and my mom was actually the secretary there for a while, and she would tell some stories at dinner time to my dad, like really funny stories about working with Dyson and Dubes. So I think she got the first inside scoop on just how funny Dubes was and how fun he was to work with. And then, you know, when I made the varsity lacrosse team in high school, he was technically my coach, but he didn't coach me. I was an offensive player, so I was like number 16 to him, you know. He didn't really, you know the names really of most of the offensive players. We were just kind of numbers. But once we started coaching together, it was when we really connected. And I'm going to start with this. I think the thing I miss the most is just having a catch with Dubes. Dubes would bring his stick out to practice every day, and you know, I've been coaching 30 years now. I always bring my stick out, and although sometimes, you know, Dubes could be considered someone who was hard to find joy around, he truly enjoyed playing catch. And I think when you boil it right down to, I know he talked about how he kept it simple, you know, fundamentals was his whole thing. And, you know, I loved playing catch with Dubes. And look, before you think this is like a Hallmark story of a buddy and, you know, playing catch, Dubes didn't play catch like, you know, everyone else plays catch. Dubes played a version of catch called cuffs. And the idea behind cuffs was to, you know, the white whale, the unicorn, was to throw the uncatchable ball, you know. And so a game of cuffs would typically start with, and Dubes never had to tell you we're starting. He would just pick up a stick, give you a nod, and it was like, all right, we're going to have a little game. You would stand, you know, with your feet kind of wide base, and once you planted your feet, they were to remain there. Toes, you know, facing Dubes, so we would face each other, and we'd just start throwing the ball back and forth. And then every once in a while, you know, it'd be zing, you know, right on the off hip. And the idea was to see if you could, you know, make the other person not catch the ball. And, you know, Dubes was so good at it, and we got so good at it. I think I probably played more games of catch with Dubes than anybody. And it was so much fun, and it just made me think about, you know, how, like, he took joy in those simple things about lacrosse. And We took lacrosse and coaching seriously, but we never took ourselves too seriously. And we had so much fun doing it, and I can't wait. I think the first thing I'm going to do when I get up there with you, Dubes, is have a game of cuffs. So it was always just fun playing catch with Dubes. Dubes and I were always roommates in spring break trips, which we really looked forward to. And, they say you never really know someone till you either live with them, travel with them, get involved with money with them. But, for the better part of 20 years, Dubes was my roommate on spring break trips. And I got to know him really well on those spring break trips. Dubes was the guy who, he could talk intelligently on any topic. I mean, honestly, any single topic, he was so intelligent. But, on any topic, there's typically a large group of people that feel one way, a large group of people feel the other way. He always had the third perspective, the one that you never thought of. And I can't tell you how many times he made me go, I never thought of it that way. And I could probably spend the whole morning talking about just those, but I'll share a few of them with you. But yeah, he always had the third perspective. It was like Chevy, Ford, Democrat, Republican, 97 Lakers, 2006 Lakers. He had the third perspective. And so just a couple that I remember from spring break trips. One morning we were, the phone rings. It's Coach Shriver. We were supposed to have practice at 7 o'clock. It's 6:57. My buddy John Marinacci answers the phone, and I hear John "Oh, Coach, yeah, no, I have to come back in the room to answer the call. We're on our way down, So we're hustling, and we look over, and Dubes is sound asleep, right? And so I'm a young coach. He's like the elder statesman. I figured he might. It was before you set your alarm on your phone. And I thought he'd maybe put a call in. He's sound asleep. So we're like, Dubes, get up. We gotta get down to the vans. They're leaving in 3 minutes. So he gets up, takes the covers off, and, Steve slept in his birthday suit. That's what he did. And when you get up from two beds that are facing each other and you swing over to put your shoes on, it's all right. And so he went right from the birthday suit to that suit. And I remember we're kind of rushing down to the buses, and I'm like, Dubes, you wear boxers or anything, briefs, And he says to me, he's like, what's the point? I never thought of it that way. So I was an early adopter, and later on that trip, he gets another couple zingers, the Dubes perspective that I've never thought of. I was telling him, I was like, I loved coaching, and honestly, coaching at BL was like the biggest honor of my life. I mean, I was here during the golden era. We had a cast of characters, and we were winning games, and we had the king, and we were like the Lake Show. It was awesome, but I told him, I was like, the only thing I don't like is running the box. It's like I can't watch the game. I'm always worried I'm gonna send somebody offside or whatever. And then again, here comes he tells me, he goes, your problem is you're too good at it. And I was like, what do you mean I'm too good at it? How can you be too good at a job? He's like, well, if you don't want a job, don't be good at it. I never thought of it that way. My whole life I was always taught, do your best at your job. Maybe you'll rise up, you'll get another job. So that really stuck with me, and I'm like, I was like, well, what are you suggesting? He's like, well, what do you think? I didn't run the box when I was the young coach on the staff? I was like, I ran it for about half a quarter. I'm like, well, what did you do? He's like, well, I was down standing by the box, and there was some attackman there, number 6. I was like, hey, 6, get on the field. Go, get on the field. Kid steps on the field, flag down. We go man down. Shrive's looking down there. Dubin, what are you doing? My fault. They score on man up. Next face-off, we get the ball. There's another guy, 12. Hey, 12, get on the field. Go, 12, get on the field. 12 gets on the field, another flag down, and now Coach Shrives is irate. Like, Dubin, what are you doing? You're done. And that was the end of me coaching the box. So if you don't want a job, don't be good at it. So I told him, I was like, Dubes, I don't think I can do that. I just don't know that I could, just sabotage the team, So, needless to say, I ran the box until like Ian Shore, came and was the younger guy and could relieve me. But I also remember him telling him, he's like, suit yourself, you run the box or whatever. But then he tells me, and this one really kind of hit. I never thought of this. He goes, well, every one of us, you have a predetermined number of heartbeats. And every one you spend in the box doing something you don't want to do is one closer to your last one. I never thought of it that way. I had never heard anyone equate time with heartbeats. But man, I'll tell you, he literally, he was like a modern day Stoic. He was like Marcus Aurelius, I literally have a ring here, because of Dubes. Inside of it, it says memento mori. And what that means is, remember, you will die at some point. And Dubes really converted me into this kind of stoic kind of mindset that he had. But I just never forget that. And he just always had this unique perspective. And those just were a couple of the ones that I can remember from being his roommate. So then, when we coached together, like I said, I was here during a great time. We had a collection of really enigmatic characters that coached. And I got to say, I've coached in other places now for 30 years, but it could never replicate what we had here at BL. Mostly because there was two people that you just couldn't replicate. One was obviously Dubes. No one had another Dubes. There is only one Dubes. So that could never be replicated. And then honestly, the culture that Coach Shrives created here was just, it was unique. I know he was affectionately known as the King, and it was great getting on the bus after we'd win, and it'd be like, long live the King, hip hip hooray, hip hip hooray. And it was awesome. I mean, we could always puff our chests out and be like, yeah, man, this is the Lake Show. We're rolling, we're coming to roll you. And it was fun. But Dubes always took that as, well, if he's the king, then I am the leader of, the merry men, the court, the jesters, if you will. So most of the little games we would play were kind of, at Coach Shrives' expense, but he was always good-natured about it. So a few of the games we would play, and Dubes would be the guy that would say, all right, this is on, we're doing this today. So the first was the hard ice. And the hard ice meant that you could not respond to Coach Shriver at all. Like, if he said your name, you had to ignore it. If he walked up to you on the field, you had to walk away. And you can imagine, this was kind of hard to do, especially for a young coach. I've never seen it executed as well as one day. It was, Dubes and I and Brian Nee, and we're walking, across the street. We're getting near the split dollar shop, and he's going in to get some peanut M&Ms. And Shrives is behind us. He's just kind of cresting into the parking lot, and he's like, hey, Steve. And Dubes is looking side eyes like, hold the line, hold the line. And we keep walking, And Shrives thought like he didn't hear him, as if you couldn't hear him, And so he says it a little louder, Steve! And we hold the line. So we keep walking. And then finally, he's like at full throat. He's like, Steve! He's like, oh, I get it. You're icing me. And it was so funny because he actually recognized like that he was being iced, and he knew the name of what Steve called it, the hard ice, So that was hard, though, and Dubes started to realize, like, it's funny, obviously, and it's enjoyment, but the problem with the hard ice is it's just quick, it's short-lived. And what's better than having some fun at someone's expense is when they don't even realize it's happening. So the soft ice was born, and the soft ice meant that you could not directly answer any question that Coach Shriver asked you, but you could redirect it through somebody else. And, so the soft ice was fun because it was high-minded humor, which was definitely Dubes, right? And if you were good at it, it could continue, like, throughout practice, throughout a bus ride home. So typically it would be, we'd be on the bus ride home, and Shrives would be like, Dubes, your man down sucked today. What were we, 0 for 3? And then Dubes, we're in close proximity. He cannot answer that question, but he would say, well, I don't know, Gino, maybe if your man up would start running the other team's plays rather than working on the stuff that you're doing, we might be a little bit better. Well, I can't answer that question, so I'll redirect it. Well, Quint, why don't you take a group of guys and, run the other team's plays, and then we can, get a little bit better on man-down defense. And if we were effective enough, I think Coach Rise would feel like his question got answered, but it was never really directly answered. And he might have a follow-up question. So the soft ice had a lot of staying power. We were constantly in soft ice mode when Dubes put it on, and then he would take it off. Then a few one-off games that he had. Mimic Monday. So, Monday was typically a pretty droll day. Dubes would say, well, it's time for Mimic Monday. And Mimic Monday meant that, whatever coach said, every assistant coach had to mimic it, but in a different little way, put a little different spin on it. So, we were rolling with like 10 assistant coaches. So you can imagine, if Shries would say something like, Foster can't go left on a green arrow, and I'd be down there, well, you'd want to jump in quick because someone else would take your answer. Like, yeah, he's all right, coach. And then someone else would be like, yeah, he's got no left, it must be a Republican, When you got to the end, you couldn't think of what to say. You had to say something that mimicked it. And then after a while, he's like, that's kind of hard, so let's just, whatever he says, we're going to say the exact same thing. So you can imagine the echo chamber of like 10 guys saying the same thing, good Googa Mooga, good Googa Mooga, good Googa. And the boys on the field, they had so much fun. And that was really the joy in it, is that, the coaches were having fun, the boys were having fun. We were the lake show, we were like the pirate ship, but it was our pirate ship. We had the captain of the pirate ship, and it was awesome. It all worked, and it was so much fun. Obstinance Day was, you had to be disagreeable in every possible way imaginable. Hey, Gino, why don't you take the attack down there and work on some shooting? We actually worked a lot on it yesterday. We're good. Well, then go work on that zone offense play you put in. Actually, I got out here a little early, and we repped it a few times. We're good to go. Well, Dubes, go down with your guys and work on the slide packages, And don't talk so much. Get them repping it right away. So what does that mean? That means a 20-minute fireside chat with Uncle Dubes, with the boys sitting on the bench, and he giving them a talk. So Obstinance Day was a blast. And then the last one, and I don't want to take up so much time, but the last one was probably the most fun. The best version of Dubes was when we were on the spring break trips. He was just in his element. He looked forward to it. We all looked forward to it. And it was so much fun. We had so much fun on those trips. And most of them were in Florida, which was a great spot. And we would go out to dinner a lot. We would go out for lunch. We'd go out for dinner. And, we were the assistant coaches, so we would always get to wherever we were going to eat first. And Coach Shrives had the responsibility to make sure the guys are okay back at the hotel, so he would always come last. So one day we're sitting there, and Dubes is like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to leave one seat open for when Shrives arrives. It's going to be the worst seat. I'm going to sit in the seat that he would want, which is the one, in the back where he can survey everything and, see the people walking by. So I'll take that. We'll leave one seat open for him. And then the youngest coach on the staff had to sit right next to Coach Shriver, and he had to order exactly what Coach Shriver ordered. And Dubes was always like, that will just annoy him, because, he's going to order something special, and then, to have someone else copy the order will be it'll annoy him. So, and then he's like, and then here's the last rule, okay? We're going to put the condiments right in front of Coach Shriver, and every one of you has to ask for something during the meal. You have to ask him personally for it. He has to hand it to you, and after you use it, you have to give it back to him to put away, because he won't want to do that, So as you can imagine, the hilarity that would ensue at our meals was something. We'd sit down, business as usual. Then the order would come. I'll have the encrusted halibut with a Heineken with ice and a side of club soda. Make that and I'll have some beef tips on the side. Make those Pittsburgh rare. So then, Ian Shore, I just distinctly remember Ian like, all right, and what are you going to have, Ian? I think I'm going to have the encrusted halibut. And I don't really drink Heineken, but I'd like to try one. I'll have a Heineken and with some ice, maybe a side of club soda instead of water. And I don't even know what Pittsburgh Rare is, but I'll take my beef tips Pittsburgh Rare. And so it was so funny. And then, we just start asking for the condiments, and they go back and forth and back and forth. And it was just those kind of things that we did nonstop. And look, I'm not even here talking about Dubes, the coach. He was obviously a phenomenal lacrosse coach, And I know Boys Latin has always been kind of thought of as attack you. And, I coached like 2 Tewaaraton winners when I was here. We were always loaded on offense. But the secret sauce really was how consistent Boys Latin's always been on defense, and Dubes was the original seed there. And his coaching tree, everyone that's followed from him has remained that consistency. But the fun we were having just made coming to practice every day the best of times. So I'll leave you with this, the legacy of Dubes. I'm a classroom teacher still. Almost every day, kids will come in my class. Anyone that is doing something for me, getting my coffee, getting my water, and if they ever ask me, why do you keep picking her or picking him? Well, they do a good job, If they're going to keep getting that job. If you don't want a good job, don't be good at it, And believe me, we do not waste time, and we do not waste time. And every time I have to, waste time going to get a pencil for a kid that doesn't have one, I'm like, I'm 3 heartbeats now closer to my last one. And the kids find that very interesting, and I'm hoping that maybe they go, I never thought of it that way. And then the last one is, like I said, I am a teacher, so I give pencils out a lot because I'm a math teacher, and kids just don't have pencils. And then so I'll ask kids, what kind of pencil do you want? You want a first team All-American? You want an honorable mention All-American, or do you want a 10-10-10 pencil? And a 10-10-10 pencil comes from one of Dube's favorite sayings is, some of the guys, he called them 10-10-10ers. And a 10-10-10er to Dubes was a guy that you put in if you were up by 10, down by 10, or 10 seconds left. So as you can imagine, a 10-10-10er pencil is about this long. It cannot be sharpened anymore. Erasers bitten off, teeth marks in it. But the kids love the 10-10-10ers. And I love Dubes, and I can't wait to have a game of cuffs with him at some point. So thank you, everybody.
That was awesome, Gene. Good morning. My name's Augie Maselli, and Georgiana asked if I could speak today. Thanks, George. I stand here today with a heart full of warm memories and a lively spirit. No good? There you go. Thank you. I stand here today with a heart full of warm memories and the lively spirit of our great friend, Steve Dubin, or as many of us know him, Dubes. When Jay Kreider first brought me on the campus, I had no idea a simple contract would lead to 17 years of meeting truly great people and forging lasting friendships, the best of which was Steve. A few years in, Dubes took over the reins as the facility director, and our weekly meetings quickly evolved. They became less about scheduling and more about family and genuine friendship. I remember on my first social outing with Steve, an invitation to the Ravens game, I had to work that morning and of course was running late. The silent card ride was long, and I thought, well, there goes my chance. But thankfully the Ravens won, and my post-game reflections must have aligned with his because I got a second invite. And that was the magic of Dubes. He was a creature of habit and strong opinions. And I remember one time during a coffee break, I asked him, I said, hey, Coach, how's the lacrosse game going to fare this year? Playoff bound? Playoffs? Playoffs? Are you kidding? He says, I have 2 guys that can catch and throw, 6 Louis that can string 3 passes down the field, and you're talking playoffs? I think the Lake went undefeated that year and won the national championship. Way to go, Shrives. But that was Steve, fiercely dedicated, always a dash pessimistic before the season, hating bull roasts, and forever disagreeing with the Ravens coaching staff. One of my greatest joys was introducing Dubes to new things. To him, college football was second rate, and the military academies were a step above high school. But one year I managed to secure tickets to the Army-Navy game, and it took a bribe, club-level seats, parking pass, so we went. Bundled up like he was going to the Arctic, we watched the march on, the flybys, and the parachuters. The sheer discipline and dedication of those players on the field won him over. He became a fan. Then there was the deep-sea fishing trip. We decided to go for tuna and marlin, and he said yes before he could think, and then began to research things. Do you know they go out 100 miles? Yeah, Coach, I know that. He's like, there are no gas stations out there. Does this guy know what he's doing? I'm like, yeah, Coach, he's good. He does this for a living. How about the chairs? Are they sturdy enough? I said, Coach, they don't use chairs anymore. You lock in with a belt, and the rod's connected. And he looked at me and said, what if you catch a really big marlin? I said, just stay off your toes, don't get too close to the edge, and that's all I replied. The captain of the boat heard us ribbing him, and during the safety talk, he made sure to address Steve's belt concerns. The captain said, it's been a long time since we lost someone, so stay away from the edge and never get on your toes. Dubes paced the whole way out. But when the first wave of fish hit our lines, the captain called Steve out, and he was the first to go, and it was pure entertainment. He landed a 45-pound tuna and instantly realized he was in no danger, and we told that story for weeks. Steve was, first and foremost, dedicated to his family. Our kids used to play together, and it was always an honor to be included to a backyard barbecue or a holiday party. Steve's wife, Georgiana, who he loved very much, was the calm to his panic, steady presence that brought him peace and balance. Peter and Marty were his reason for everything. He loved his family fiercely, and they were his true pride and joy. The tributes that came in on social media said it best. Ryan Kirby wrote, Steve advised, coached, and made everything more fun. He treated us like men, but acted our age at times as well. He embodied the spirit and motto, esse quam viderum, to be rather to seem. And Gene Ubriaco wrote, I've never met anyone like him. Intelligent on any topic, ridiculously athletic, unique perspective on everything, loyal, humble, and humorous. Like the legendary names that built BL, Williams, Earhart, Smith, Gelston, Shriver, Steve Dubin joins the ranks of BL legends. He was a great guy, a loyal friend, and a loving family man. We're all better off for knowing him, and I was truly lucky to be his friend. Love you, Dubes, and may your memory always be a cheerful story told with a smile. Thank you.
Well, it's pretty evident that I'm the dumbest guy in the room, so I don't know why I'm last. I've spent over, and some of these, there will be some maybe repetition, if you will, but I've spent 45 years with Steve, 4 coaching him, 30 coaching with him, and the last 11 working at BL. By now, after hearing many stories about him, it should be evident to everyone that he really was a legend. First, a few thank yous. A thanks to Chris Post for everything he's done, organizing this event, getting it ready, getting the campus ready, getting every little thing from live streaming this event prepared. Steve's close friends, Paul Knott, Augie Maselli, the BL community, and others who checked in with Steve on a regular basis to let him know how much they cared and loved him. A special thanks to Steve's friend, John Ciccarone. When Steve was diagnosed with cancer 3.5 years ago, John checked in with Steve every day, sometimes twice a day. And he was a regular visitor, sitting in the chair next to Steve, watching TV, often Bonanza reruns. Why Bonanza? Who knows? David Lipinski, who has been close to Steve since he graduated from BL in 1988 and is responsible with Georgiana for organizing today's program and was invaluable help to Georgiana as she navigated these past 2 weeks. Mary Wigglesworth, Steve's campus confidant, was somebody Steve constantly shared his ordeal with as Mary was going through a similar experience with her own cancer. Steve's caregivers at University of Maryland Medical Center and have been a source of inspiration and kindness. Steve's maintenance crew, Wayne Cornish, Randy Staines, Darren Tucker, Marquise Bishop, Tyler Wolf, and Bill Ryan for picking up the slack for Steve's absence over the last 3.5 years and especially the last few months. However, no one has been there for Steve the way Georgiana, Peter, and Marty have. They have forever been the joy and love of his life, and their unwavering support for him since his cancer diagnosis lifted his spirits consistently. Georgiana, in her humble way, just like her husband, was constantly tasked with navigating Steve's medical insurance, making countless hospital trips, taking care of Peter and Marty, all while working full time. Chris mentioned Steve's 40-plus years of working at BL, but let's not forget the 9 years he was here as a student. From the moment Steve entered BL in the 4th grade, he was a consistently outstanding student and athlete. In the 5th grade, Steve became a class officer and stayed a class officer every year for the next 7 years, and as a senior was elected student body president. Academically, Steve was always at or near the top of his class, and in his junior year was inducted into the Eureka chapter of the National Honor Society. At graduation in 1979, Steve was presented the Alumni Cup for leadership based on character. In athletics, Steve was a tenacious and gifted performer. He earned 11 varsity letters, 4 in both football and lacrosse, and 3 in wrestling. His junior year, Steve won the LeBron Award given to the best junior athlete at Boys Latin. And as a senior, he captained both the football and lacrosse teams. For 3 years in football, Steve made all Tri-County, the football league's name at the time. Steve kept off his football career scoring a TD in his last high school game against St. Paul's in a 22-0 BL win. In lacrosse, Steve was a 4-year starter on defense, played in 3 straight MIAA championship games, and in his senior year was selected a first-team All-Metro defenseman by the Baltimore Sun. At the athletic banquet at the end of Steve's senior year, back then at BL, the athletic banquet occurred at the end of the year and all sports recognized their honorees. Steve won a number of awards in the 3 sports he played, as well as 2 awards available to any athlete that played at BL. The Coaches Cup for teamwork and leadership, as well as the Kelly Award for contributions to Boys Latin athletics. At that athletic banquet, Ridge Warfield, Steve's football and lacrosse coach, said Steve never missed a practice or a game and would be someone I want in my foxhole. That same comment would apply to Steve and his job as head of alumni relations, coaching lacrosse, and then as head of facilities. You could always, always count on him. Steve was truly one of a kind, as I'm sure you by now know. He was sensitive, humble, quirky, mischievous, brilliant, purposeful, competitive, and beyond funny. After he graduated from Johns Hopkins and started working at BL in the fall of '84, Steve joined the lacrosse staff the spring of '85. He continued coaching for 30 years, and like he did in high school, he never missed a practice or a game. When Coach Ubriaco joined the staff in the '90s, the fun we were having coaching got even better. It was Coach Ubriaco who gave Steve the nickname Rainy Day, as it was always raining in Steve's world. I used to hear a constant question from many middle school colleagues: why is Steve so dour? Until Steve got to know you, he'd come off as a shy, quiet, and even standoffish. He just didn't like to dally around and chat. I would try as best as possible to tell everyone what a special person and colleague he was. But the nickname stood the test of time and was as well-deserved even for those of us who knew Steve really well. When Steve first started coaching, he was nervous about how he'd do, how he'd relate to kids, and nervous about disappointing the players, their parents, and the BL lacrosse fans. But even more than those things, he was nervous talking. You see, Steve stuttered, especially when he was uncomfortable. He soon realized that he had something to offer kids every day. His stuttering improved. It improved to the point that he would often joke about the one time in a high school football game when Coach Warfield called a timeout and asked Steve by himself to come from the huddle over to the sidelines. Ironically, Mr. Warfield also happened to stutter. After the timeout was over and Steve returned to the huddle, the players asked him, what did Coach Warfield talk about? He said nothing. Apparently, they looked at each other for an entire minute and never said a word. Truth or fiction, it was one of Steve's many, many and great stories. During practice, he'd often tell the defensive players to sit on the benches while he imparted some wisdom. They would be over there for up to 15 and on an occasional 30 minutes. The rest of the team continued to drill, waiting for him to finish so the entire team could actually practice together. It would drive Quint Kesenick crazy, a BL coach for about 20 years. Quint called it Steve's tea and crumpets time. However, those talks have stayed with his defensemen to this day. One of Steve's favorite stories was when he would tell over and over about his playing days at Hopkins. Johns Hopkins coach Henry Ciccarone, John's father, Zim's head coach when Zim was there. Coach Ciccarone would put the fear of God in Steve. One trait Steve always had was his desire to please people he respected and cared about. Chick, as Coach Ciccarone was known, was a tough, no-nonsense coach. If Coach Ciccarone was on the moon and whispered something, Steve would hear him. Steve's defensive coach, Freddie Smith, that Don referred to, was just the opposite of Chick. He was a good cop and a wonderful, kind man and an excellent coach. Steve copied many of his methods when he became a coach. There was a big game at Homewood on one Saturday versus University of North Carolina. The place was packed, thousands of spectators. Steve was nervous. A major rule for a defender at Hopkins was to not let an attackman get the ball from a clearing defender or midfielder, which would allow the team to settle in and play offense. Brian referred to this. That was what you were supposed to do to your attackman. During the game, attackman Steve thought he had correctly got a pass from a clearing defender. Steve knew what was coming next. In front of a huge crowd in a very noisy Homewood field, Steve heard Chick scream, "Freddie! Freddie, what the F have you been doing down there all week? Get him the F out of the game." Steve put his head down, would jog over to the sideline, and sit down on the bench and never say a word. Steve's former players remember as a coach, Steve had many non-negotiables. You've heard coaches Farrell and Ubriaco talk about a few. Many of them were attached to phrases Steve either heard from someone or he invented. Dress for 5. All players and coaches new to BL varsity would be instructed to heed that warning. In February and early March, the temperature differences between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock could sometimes be 20 degrees. Dress accordingly was the message. Run until you lose it. Steve would go crazy when a defenseman carried the ball up the field and continued to run into trouble. Get rid of the damn thing. Coach Farrell happened to be a constant culprit. Steve would start yelling at him before he even got close to the midline. However, I always wanted Brian to keep going since he was a brilliant player in the open field. We respectfully disagreed, one of the few times in our 30 years together. It's not what you do right that counts, but what you don't do wrong. He stole that one from Mr. Warfield, and in many of Steve's tea and crumpets talks, he'd use it early and often. Stop the ball, Joe Rollo. One of Steve's pet peeves was defenders who didn't get back in the hole during a fast break. The defender's job closest to the ball was always to stop the ball carrier. In the 2002 championship game, Joe Rollo happened to be in that position multiple times, and Steve would be begging Joe Rollo to stop the ball. From that game forward, defenders knew when they heard Steve say, "Stop the ball, Joe Rollo," what it meant. "Good passes get caught" was a very constant refrain he used all the time. One way to teach it was playing catch, not with Coach Ubriaco, but with many of the players. He'd throw the ball at their head, their feet, midsection, all on purpose. Then when they didn't catch it, Steve would apologize. And Steve would apologize for his bad pass by saying, "See, bad passes are hard to catch." Cup check. When the team would be on the ground stretching during both before and after practice, Steve would let the defensemen know a cup check was coming. He walked by them with his stick, whacking away at their midsection. At Rucks last night, one of Steve's former players remembered he using a putter for a cup check. Who knows why? We always pitied the poor guy who forgot his cup, since those checks would hurt, but they would always finish with a 3-stop. Behoove was a word Steve used often. Baron Willard, class of '94, came by school this week and said it might be his favorite word and always reminded him of Steve and playing lacrosse at BL. On game days, athletes needed to be at school by a certain time to be eligible to play. Baron made the mistake once, and Steve told him it would behoove you to get to school on time. We started going on spring break trips regularly in the 90s. They became events that the coaching staff and kids loved and still do. Steve was a constant entertainment for players and coaches. We packed the kids into 4 or 5 15-passenger vans, and only Steve would pick his passengers. There wouldn't always be defensemen, but kids who might need some of his verbal, tough love, something he excelled at. The coaches, including Steve, would run the heck out of them as they were running away. Steve, on the last day of the trip, always Wednesdays, Steve would start asking the kids the day or two before if they knew what the forecast for, what was the forecast for on Wednesday. They didn't, but would then ask Steve what it was. Pain was the only answer. The coaches, including Steve, would run the heck out of them, and you've heard some of this before, as they were running away from the coaches, we'd switch spots with Steve. They'd be down there running that way, and all of a sudden they would turn around, ready to go again, and there he was in the middle of the field, sometimes sitting on a chair, just doing this. Boys, we're just beginning. And they've already been running probably for about 45 minutes. Brian talked about the ladder. He'd go up the ladder, down the ladder, and say, "You know what? I have a number in mind. Let's try this again." And on it went till they were so exhausted they couldn't even move. When we would, back in the late 80s and 90s, there was a lacrosse forum called Lax Power. Lax Power had various forums or sections, D1 men's, D1 women's, D2 men's, etc. And there was also a high school one. People would post interesting comments, opinions about recent games, upcoming games, rivalries, players, and fans. Steve thought it would be useful to chime in under different names. He was a big Loyola supporter named Donnybrook, the Gilman fan, Larry the Laker, and even a few more. MIAA teams, players, and parents would participate. Steve saw it as a great opportunity to get under the skin of our opponents. Bulletin board material, he called it. His creativity and sense of humor, no bounds. Steve hated 3-goal leads. He'd rather be up by 1 and down a man with less than a minute than have a 3-goal lead. Late in the game with a dreaded 3-goal lead, he paced up and down the sidelines like an expected father in the delivery room. Priceless. Steve hated it when I started subbing too early, and then he thought I should. So Steve came up, and Gene's alluded to it. Steve came up with his recommendation for the best way to follow when we subbed. He called it 10-10-10 rule. You heard the rest. Did you ever notice Steve's sideline attire? Work boots and a floppy hat and maybe a BL Lax parka. He also wore that blue pullover hat that he would maneuver in certain ways to let the defense know we were changing from man-to-man or zone or back from zone to man-to-man. That way he didn't have to yell anything to his defense, and as the defense would always peek over the sidelines for his instruction. Another one is his defensive adjustment was throwing junk defenses, in other words, weird ones, when BL was down a man. By changing even up defenses between zone and man and throwing the junk man-down defenses at teams, our opponents had to spend extra practice time preparing for BL. A huge advantage for us, especially since high school teams typically only had 1 or 2 days to prepare between games. Steve stopped coaching after 30 years in 2014. His bookend career at BL included winning a championship in his very first year in 1985. 30 years later, we won another championship and went the entire season undefeated. You already heard Steve told players that when they were addressed by a coach, they only had 3 responses: yes, no, and I don't understand. Short and to the point. When Steve found out he had cancer, Coach Scharf made T-shirts with those words on the back. It was Lewis's way to make sure the kids played that season with Steve on their minds every day. They will do something similar this spring, a fitting tribute to someone who put his heart and soul into the BL lacrosse program. Once Steve took over as a facilities manager for an entire campus, it was an amazing sight to see. The job is so difficult and beyond time-consuming, like when he had the staff get here 2, 3, 4 in the morning to push snow and spread his prized possession, salt, everywhere. But he was new to it his first year and when school opened. A week or so into the first fall, there was a few athletic events on campus. He went ballistic about all these strange people and cars invading BL space. I think sometimes he thought it was his. I'm not sure he didn't consider it his space. Steve had to get a general reminder that sports are actually something that happened on any school's property. Steve could get testy when faculty and staff wanted things done yesterday, and also when someone would tell him the day before an event, something like today, that his crew had to set up for. One thing Steve always expected of the people was to do things the right way. However, in true Steve fashion, if he wanted something done right, he did it himself. He was a hard worker. Cable TV and its many different options were something Steve hated dealing with. After some study in various ways he might be able to beat the system, the mad scientist eventually found a way to watch any TV station in the United States, see any athletic event, and he could find and watch essentially any movie ever made, all basically for free. Steve would try to explain how he did it, but he might as well have been speaking Chinese. I'm not sure Albert Einstein could have figured it out. Steve was constantly getting calls from contractors he worked with or salesmen begging him about a product. He had a specific ringtone for many of them. His best was a Star Wars theme he used for those that made him cringe. I'm not so sure earlier in the marriage that he assigned the ringtone to Georgiana. Steve and I started 2 lacrosse camps about 30 years ago that Coach Farrell runs now. Steve Quint and I also ran a goalie camp for about 20 years. After a few short years running these camps, Steve had an idea. At the camps, many parents and relatives would sit in the stands to watch the kids play. Steve loved to grill, at home, and he soon set up his grill and sold dogs, burgers, sodas, and chips. He had a blast when the daily camp sessions were he had a blast, and then when the daily camp sessions were over, the counselors, or vultures as Steve called them, would devour the leftovers. During the goalie camp, one of the counselors was an older man who called himself the goalie man. He'd come over not at the end of the session, but during camp and eat a burger or two, and then he'd grab a few more after the session was over. He drove Steve crazy. So Steve would put a few burgers on the side of the grill and leave them there for about 30 minutes. The hockey pucks, as he called them, were so hard and dry, the goalie man stopped coming over. Steve, soon after college, became a memorabilia collector. He'd go to autograph events and has a wonderful collection of baseballs signed from major league players who have hit 500 home runs, football signed by Super Bowl champs, and even an old seat from Memorial Stadium. His collection, much more than a few baseballs and football, was one of his pride and joys. During practice and games, Steve's quirky side would always emerge. Everyone who has ever watched a BL game would know that Steve was on the sideline, whether he was wearing his floppy hat, his work boots, or his blue cold weather cover. Before COVID hit, Stephen and I were trying to write a book. The title was going to be So You Think You Want to Be a Coach. And there is little doubt it would have been a bestseller, especially when he inputted his stories, sayings, and philosophies. We are going to have an entire chapter on one of Steve's coaching tips: to invest more in the team than what your players do is to have your heart broken. Some line he used constantly. Steve was always doing everything in his power to build a consistent winning operation. He even started grading pregame speeches I'd deliver before a contest. I never asked why, but knew full well that by putting pressure on me to attempt to deliver a good speech, Steve wanted to ensure that the kids were ready to play the next day. Just something else that was so much a part of his genius. The BL lacrosse program now has an annual award in Steve's name given to the team's unsung hero. That is a perfect award to have Steve's name attached. Steve never brought attention to himself as a player or a coach, other than his game day dress, of course, and was happy being a part of something special that he helped create as a player and a coach more than anybody could possibly imagine. On the home front, besides grilling, Steve loved working on his house, making a wood fire, watching TV, and in the past few years, betting. Very modestly, I might add, on sports on DraftKings. He even bought his son Marty into the scheme. He was always trying to beat the system with new betting ideas, including weird parlays, teasers, and prop bets. The family started going to Block Island in Rhode Island years ago, and it was one of Steve's favorite times of the year. He was even able to make it this summer, which uplifted his spirits a great deal. Steve's love for Georgiana, Peter, and Marty was unequivocal. He loved having Peter and Marty work for him at BL in the summer and was so proud of both of them, like Peter's recent pursuit to become a volunteer fireman, and the Casper Award and Marty winning the Casper Award received this fall for essentially being just an incredibly great kid. Boys Latin decided to honor Steve by creating a scholarship in his name. If you would like to make a donation, please send it to school and designate a gift to the appropriately named Steve Dubin Rainy Day Fund. If you had a chance to read any of the comments on BL's Facebook page or BL's Lacrosse Facebook page, you would find some wonderful and thoughtful tributes to Steve. Some have been referred to. One in particular stood out, written by Logan Burke, class of '83, and a former defenseman. This is Logan. If someone were to ask if Steve Dubin and I were close, I would say no. If they asked if he liked me, I'd probably say, no, I don't think so. If they asked me if he was nice to me, I'd say, no, not really. If they asked if I loved him and appreciated him for the things he taught me, I would say, yes, absolutely 100%. On his path to helping hundreds of kids to become better players and people, he helped me become a better coach, and who has been fortunate to help another few hundred kids. What more could you ask of a life that has a ripple effect for hundreds and hundreds of kids that have made their lives better and more productive? I can't imagine a better testament to Steve. This is mine. He was one of a kind, and anyone who got the honor and privilege to work and be with him has a significant void in our lives. Rest in peace, Rainy Day.
Why you look so sad? The tears are in your eyes. Come on and come to me now. Don't be ashamed to cry. Let me see you through. 'Cause I've seen the dark side too. When the night falls on you, you don't know what to do. Nothing you confess could make me love you less. I'll stand by you. I'll stand by you. Won't let nobody hurt you. I'll stand by you. So if you're mad, get mad. Don't hold it all inside. Come on and talk to me now. Hey, what do you got to hide? I get angry too. Well, I'm alive like you. When you're standing at the crossroads, don't know which path to choose. Let me come along. 'Cause even if you're wrong, I'll stand by you. I'll stand by you. Won't let nobody hurt you. I'll stand by you. Take me into your darkest hour, and I'll never desert you. I'll stand by you. And when the night falls on you, baby, you're feeling all alone. You won't be on your own.
Thank you for joining us this morning to celebrate the life of Steve Dubin. Family will receive visitors next door in the Student Commons, which is out at the Iglehart Center and off to the right. May all the heavenly hosts welcome Steve into heaven above, and may his memory forever be a blessing.